Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's share some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to share today concerns queers for Palestine. Now, to be honest, I never thought I'd be talking about queers for Palestine, but I find it's a really good way to illustrate a dynamic in identity politics. So let's dive into it. And of course, what everyone thinks is, why? Why queers for Palestine? And what I hear people say is stuff like, well, in Palestine, they have tossed these same people off the roof. Now, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not an expert on Muslim culture in Palestine or anything like that. I don't know how tolerant they are. I can believe that sort of thing can and does happen, but it's not something I really want to deal with. But I think it's fair to say that when you think about it, people who identify as queer should not have sympathy for people with highly religious, a traditional religious like Islam. So why are they advocating for Palestine? Now, one might think, well, maybe it's because the devastation of Palestine is so great and people are dying and they're just compassionate. But there's other situations where people are dying and they're not that compassionate about it. They weren't as compassionate when Jews were being massacred in the October massacre. So why queers for Palestine? Well, I think to understand this, we have to understand identity politics. The identity politics is about this notion of groups being oppressed and oppressors. And it has a very dichotomous way of looking at things. So either you're the oppressed or you're the oppressor. Now, I would argue that while there's some information that may help to determine who's the oppressed or who's the oppressor, a lot of it is socially constructed. And for whatever reason, and we could think about why this is the case, but for whatever reason, Jews have been thrown into the category of the oppressor, and Palestinians have been thrown into the category of the oppressed. That helps to explain everything. Because now, the queers, as part of the oppressed group, have an alliance with the Palestinians. They feel that they too share an oppression. And they understand it's not the exact same thing, but in this dichotomous way of looking at things, if they are the oppressed, we are the oppressed, they are for us, and we are for them. And rational thinking about are we really allies with them kind of goes out the window. Since the Palestinians have gained the status of being the oppressed in a more progressive identity politics, and they share that with people who identify as queer, they see themselves as allies, at least here in the United States. Likely over in Palestine, that same sentiment would not be there. But we're not in Palestine. We're in the United States. There's a theory out there called alliance theory. And I discovered it, about a month ago. I found it very fascinating. And this theory says that we develop these alliances with groups, and based on those alliances, we come to our political conclusions. So if I develop an alliance with a group, even if that group in theory hates me, even if that group may in other situations harass me, oppress me, persecute me, as long as I have that alliance, it changes my politics. Now, the writers of the alliance theory, what they argue is that thinking about people rashly coming to their conclusions is a mistake. The conclusion we come to politically is based on our alliances. And as I've looked at this theory, it does an excellent job of exploring the sort of identity politics we talk about. The identity politics where we create these alliances with each other. And based on these alliances, on our social identities, that becomes the center of our political activism. And so when that happens, it's not about, we agree with this group because of this. No, they are our allies. Likewise, it's not as much we disagree with this group because of this, they are our enemies. Alliance theory shows just how polarized we are, that we ally with people who may want to do us harm in a different circumstance, if they truly had power. I mean, this is one of the frustrations people have with the Queers for Palestine, arguing that if these traditional Muslims gained full power, what would happen to sexual minorities? And while I'm not an expert on Islam, as far as I'm not going to write about Islam, I'm not going to deal with in depth what Islam is, I know enough to know that sexual minorities in Muslim countries do not have it so well. So that alliance theory, identity politics, explains Queers for Palestine. Can you think of another reason? Can you think of a better reason why sexual minorities would be going out on the street and holding up signs and advocating, maybe even getting thrown in jail for Palestinians? Identity politics can explain a lot of strange things. Loyalty to the oppressed group is a good way to explain things. And the notion that people rashly come to their conclusions, I think we have to challenge that. Is it about the identity politics? What other things do we think that's weird, a weird alliance, but it makes sense when we look at identity politics? That's something that maybe we could think about as we go through our society and think about how our identity politics drives us perhaps to supporting people who do not have our best interests at heart. Does this shatter some paradigms? Paradigms thinking about why Queers for Palestine exists. And there are other types of alliances that don't seem to make sense except about doing identity politics. Well, I do have a little playlist on identity politics. If you're interested in that topic, please look at the playlist. If you like this, give me a like, give me a comment. If you don't like it, give me a comment anyways. I'd like to learn a little bit more. And please consider subscribing to my channel. I like to have this sort of conversation, mixing my faith with my science, my social sciences, and thinking about things in society that may not make sense at the surface, but once you dive down deep into it, they will. Thank you, and please come back. We can shatter some more paradigms.